20 years ago, I burned out as a doctor, and it is the reason when I realized how little I knew about burnout, that I wasn't taught about this in medical school, that I didn't even know what was happening to me, that I had to sit with a psychiatry colleague and have him explain to me what was going on. And there wasn't much written about it. It was considered, back when this happened to me in 2004, in 2003, it was considered a symptom of fatigue. In the 70s, it started to be defined as, researchers started looking at stress and the impact of stress on our physiology and each cell. How do we respond to it? But by 2003, all I could find is, oh, it means someone's, pretty exhausted. Well, let's just say, fast forward to 2019, the World Health Organization now will say that it is a collection of symptoms called a syndrome. And they give it some definition that's a little bit like this: chronic unmanaged stress at work.
Just at work?
Yeah, that's what I say. I say, listen, thank you for your progress. Now you realize it's like a collection of symptoms, but it's not a diagnosis. It's not a medical diagnosis, and it's confined to work. And what I can tell you, in the decades that I've been a doctor, and I've experienced this myself, and I've taken care of so many patients, clients, companies, the world, I don't care where your stress comes from. It can come in your personal life. It can come from raising children. It can come from having aging parents. It can come from trouble in your relationship. It can come from anywhere, and your body doesn't care where it's coming from. So here's my hope. My hope is that in the future, that gets expanded. That definition expands to include stress from anywhere in your life. And so what do they define burnout as? It's a triad. So the first leg of the triad is exhaustion: physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. And it's not something that happens quickly. It's not like you're fine on Monday and not okay on Friday. You're way too sophisticated for that. Mother Nature is way too sophisticated. So you've been adjusting, just like your blood pressure and your heart rate all adjust, your hormones all adjust. So too does your physiology adjust to the stress. So this has been going on for a while, this exhaustion. And next leg comes in cynicism. Cynicism is like that voice in your head that starts to talk to you silently and say things like, it doesn't matter how hard I try. It's not going to make a difference. It doesn't matter anyway. Like all the energy and effort that I'm putting forth. And all of a sudden, like an undertow when you're walking on the beach, it's you're starting to go against yourself. You can feel it, but you can't see it. It's not out loud. It's like this experience that starts undermining you. What's going to happen is, in the process of you using more and more of your coping mechanisms, which we'll talk about in a moment, you have now exceeded your ability to adjust. And now you're starting to lose your own thought process along with this exhaustion. And what you might do, even if you're lonely or you're isolated or you're feeling like you really need connection, you might actually start distancing yourself from others, not because you don't want to connect, but because you don't have the energy for social connection. So it's called depersonalization. The third leg is ineffectiveness. You now are less effective at your job, at whatever it is you're doing. You just start to find that things are taking you longer. You're not as effective. So the triad: exhaustion, cynicism, which also includes that distancing and depersonalization, as well as ineffectiveness. So I think starting there to demystify, what is this thing called burnout? That's what it is. That's how it's defined. And then the piece that I told you, which was, you're not fine on Monday and burned out on Friday. That's not how it works. It's an ongoing adjustment where you start to run out of your coping mechanisms. So let's talk about those for a minute. Coping mechanisms. So I am an engineer, I went to engineering school, and then, as every good Indian child does, I went on to medical school. And so you can imagine in my 20s, just the amount of adjusting and coping that was happening for me to do all of that. Well, when they asked me to take 36-hour shifts in the hospital, that goes against my own biology. Just like if you're a mom and you have kids and they're up in the middle of the night, they need you. Like, it goes against your biology, and you're someone who's trying to meet the reality of your world. So what do? You're a genius. You come up with ways, right? And so mine was 2 ice cold 16-ounce Mountain Dews plus a king size Snickers bar, and you could get me up for 36 hours taking care of patients in the hospital. So I call it my sugar caffeine buzz strategy. Now, I'm not going to talk about what that does to me physiologically when I'm crashing from sugar and caffeine and all of that, but it was a good strategy so that no one died in the hospital while I was on call. So when we start doing things like this to get through our days, our weeks, our months, the deadlines, our body starts adjusting, right? Maybe it's putting on some fat in our midsection, which, by the way, stress, cortisol directly adds to your belly fat, right? So if someone ever complains to me about that, what I say to them is, talk to me about your stress levels. Why do I have to talk about my stress levels? Can't you just tell me what I need to eat and what I need to do to work out? No, it's all connected. So the last thing that I'll say about this to help people understand, so now they understand the triad of exhaustion, cynicism, and ineffectiveness. Now let's talk about the phases that someone would go through. So when stress starts, it starts in the alarm phase. It's like you're jumping on a treadmill that's going a little bit too fast. It's like that startling experience. So once that happens, your body can adjust to that. You're made for that. Except our lives tend to stay on that treadmill. And in fact, we tend to turn the speed up a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And when that alarm phase of our life becomes our regular life, we've adjusted to that. We move into the second phase of burnout called chronic adaptation, where it's everything I was talking to you about. I'm using the Mountain Dew. I'm using the Snickers bar. I take a glass of, wine after work to get the edge off. I might just find myself scrolling endlessly on social media and not realize that half an hour just passed. Whatever your retail therapy, whatever your strategy is, it's gotten you through some tough times, but now you're in chronic adaptation where you're doing these things just to get by. Or you say something like, I'll sleep on the weekend, or I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? You're trying to cut out your body's biological needs in order to adjust. So you're in the second phase, chronic adaptation. And then one more thing happens, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's one more, call or phone call from somebody, something happens, and you go sliding down the slippery slope of burnout to hitting a wall of ineffectiveness. And that's in the exhaustion phase of burnout. And that's when you have to be off on medical leave. It becomes a medical, we've got to do something. So it's true that exhaustion is a phase, and exhaustion is also a symptom in the triad that I told you about. That's true. It's a little confusing, but I want people to know what to look for. And I want them to know that it's over time.
Yeah. And it was interesting in the book, you were accounting in your own story. You started a shift like at any other shift. It seemed like it was, didn't feel like you were going to burn out that day. And then it just, I think you were having a conversation, you had said something multiple times. The nurse was like, hey, are you all right? Like, you said the same thing in 4 minutes. You said the same sentence, 4 times in 4 minutes, or whatever the frequency was. And then you just completely collapsed. And it was the proverbial, straw that broke the camel's back.
And I'm surprised by it all. That's like the fascinating thing. I've been adjusting in chronic adaptation for so long that I think it's normal. And it's so not normal. And so I just want everyone to just take a moment. If you recognize yourself in any of what we're talking about, be kind to yourself. You are a superwoman. You are a superhuman, because you have been figuring out ways to adapt your biology to the pace of this external world that we've all created. It's moving fast.